July 13th, Stanley Dale.
God guides the bold man willing to take action. It took a long time for any outsider to find the Yali people. Hidden deep among the ridges and valleys of unexplored New Guinea, these hostile tribes lived in Stone Age conditions and worshipped the mystical spirits of Kembu. Climate, terrain, language barriers, and danger of attack kept anyone from daring to explore the area, until 1960, when Stanley Dale arrived. Dale and his partner Bruno Deleu first scouted the land by plane and looked for a space to build an airstrip. Then they boated and hiked back into the area. With them came 5 natives from a neighboring friendly tribe called Dani and 2 guides from Balinga, the village they were heading toward. At the last moment, one of the guides, named Sui, ran ahead to warn his people about the strange beings who were on their way. Dale and Deleu finally stood at the edge of a pass, looking down a ridge swarming with armed strangers. Hands on his hips, Dale eyed them unabashedly. With only a moment's hesitation, he held up his palms in a sign of peace and started moving, then running straight downhill toward the crowd. Natives shouted in alarm, some ran away, and a few brave men stood their ground. Sui, the messenger guide, did his best to explain to his kinsmen that these men were not dangerous, and Dale was able to interact with the men and establish a sort of relationship. Next, Dale pressed on to investigate the potential airstrip site he had spotted earlier from the plane. He descended into the valley and headed straight for the enemy of the Balinga warriors, the Yabi and Kobak tribes. The Balinga warriors behind him screamed battle cries and followed with weapons raised, but Dale kept going. The Yabi and Kobak warriors screeched their own cries and held their weapons ready. Dale had no way to know of the long-standing rivalry between these tribes, but he knew he was facing a challenge at that moment, and it was not in his character to back down. So he pressed on, oblivious to the fact that the Balinga tribe was slowing to a shocked halt. The Balinga tribe had been bluffing. Dale reached the lowest part of the valley, and armed warriors lined the ridges in front of him and behind him. Alone, Dale crossed the river that divided the 2 territories and headed for the other warriors. The Yabi and Kobak warriors stood stunned. But suddenly, they were struck by the impression that this magnificent, courageous entity must have appeared to bring peace. A voice suddenly issued a command: "Don't kill him!" Warriors relaxed their weapons, and the crowd disappeared, and when Dale reached the bank, only a few were left standing on the bank. These men greeted Dale openly. When the rest of Dale's group saw it was safe, they all crossed the river to join him. That was the moment the messenger Sui was finally able to communicate to Dale that these 2 tribes were at war. With authority that only God could enforce, Dale ordered Sui to tell the Balinga and Yabi war chiefs that it was time to make peace. Sui hesitated, but Dale gripped his shoulders and sent him on his way. Sui rallied the leaders from his village and the enemies. With Deleu praying behind him, Dale used his interpreters to talk with the war chiefs. Finally, the people who had just been ready to let their arrows fly at one another grasped arms in forgiveness. Hebrews 13 verse 6 says, "So we say with confidence, 'The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?'" With God leading you today, what is your action step? God guides the bold man willing to take action.
Hello, men. This is Greg Books with Lost at Adventure Park. Today is July 13th and Stanley Dale. Two things really strike me about today's story. The first is the eternal perspective when you're dealing with a modern man going into a tribal system. It really speaks to the way God's spoken to man over the ages. And the second is that when you are on task, what God's put in your heart and called you to do, how fear is really put aside and any kind of rational intellect is bypassed or can be bypassed, that we would do things that we would never consider in the flesh and our rational mind. I think this is a really encouraging story on just how powerful that is for Stanley Dale to walk into the situations, for God to put that in his heart, to go to Guinea and interfere really and with tribal systems and step in faith and just cause forgiveness and transformation between those tribes. Truly remarkable. So I would challenge us today with what's in your heart. What has God called you to do for your next step? Be bold and step into it. Blessings.